And you can start. Well, hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jan Clayton and I'll be your host today. Thank you for joining us for today's session titled Coping Skills and for Anxiety and Depression. At this time, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items, then I'll introduce Dr. Crystal Collier, and then we can get started. So, if you would type your name and credentials in the email and facility name in the chat box so that we can keep track of everyone in attendance. As part of participation in this echo session, we ask that you keep your cameras turned on in order to build a more engaging community. Please remember to mute your audio when you're not speaking. And when asking questions, you can either unmute or you can interrupt when there's a pause, and you can use the chat feature to ask the question. I'm going to post the pretest in the chat, and so if you want to start that, I'll give you a few minutes to complete that. And I will continue on with some more housekeeping items. I will share the links to the post test and the evaluation towards the end of the session. Make sure your name and evaluation, name and degree and position is included. Following the session, you will be also receiving an email that contains the link to the evaluation, in case you didn't finish it or you didn't get a copy of it, and the slides that were presented today. In order to receive a continuing education for this session, you must complete the evaluation. Our presenter today is Dr. Crystal Collier. She is an expert in adolescent brain development, prevention programming, parent coaching, addiction, family of origin, and work training counselors. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Collier, and we can start our session. Okay.
Unmute myself here. Greetings, everybody from Houston, Texas. It's a really hot, humid, rainy day down here. So I may be jealous of what you guys have up there, but let me go ahead and get my screen set up and ready to go. So I've had the honor of actually presenting with you guys before. And so if you've seen me, I am very proud that you've come back to see another one. But I'm a therapist here in Houston. I've been in practice for 26 years. I specialize in seeing kids and families and adults, recovery, neurodevelopment, addiction, all kinds of issues. So I have a book called The Neuro Whereabouts Guide. And what I did is I researched 18 different high-risk behavior and I graphed them according to when they show up in our lifespan. So either elementary, middle, or high school. What I think is so scary and very interesting is that anxiety and depression are on the rise. And since 2012, we have seen disproportionate amounts of anxiety and depression in our young people. And now we can directly point to screens. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and really spend a lot of time talking about coping with anxiety and depression. So I want to start off by just making sure that you guys know that I made up a word, the Neuro Whereabouts. That's the title of my book, The Neuro Whereabouts Guide. I actually submitted this word for the Urban Dictionary and they approved it. And so I take pride in the idea that it's officially a word now. Neuro Whereabouts is where is your child or your student's brain development? What can it do and what can it not do? I've spent many years helping parents and clinicians understand what a child is capable of at any given time. And it's quite interesting. I'll share a couple cases with you guys as I go along. But the first thing that I always like to start off with is literally talking about brain development. And so, if you guys saw me present before, you probably saw this in much greater detail. But as we know, the brain is under construction. And I like to think of the two big stages of brain development. First one being between birth and about puberty, when we grow 200 billion brain cells. That's a lot of neurons that we actually are never going to use half of them, which is quite interesting. But we grow them, we develop them. And by the time we're 12, it's kind of like we get this big chunk of clay in our brain. And we don't know what it's going to look like, but we get all the material that we're ever going to need. And then what happens at puberty is the second big stage of brain development kicks in, and we start sculpting or pruning those neurons until the age of 25, when we have this beautiful masterpiece of what is our adult brain that is really well connected, but only with 100 billion neurons. This is so amazing to me that we lose half of our brain cells between puberty and around the age of 25. It seems like a really perfectly like good or bad loss of a perfectly good group of brain cells, but we literally need to make room. We need to make room for connectors. So let's review and talk about what that is. So the connectors are these little dendrites that you see on the middle and on the bottom of our neurons. So this is a little baby brain cell, and you can see the cell body right there at the bottom, this long axon that reaches north. And you guys can see the dendrites, what looks like little tree roots and tree branches. Those are our brain's connectors. And they are also my favorite brain structure, because they literally are the hardware of learning. So every time that you learn something new, or you practice something, you grow more neuronal connections, those dendrites that reach out to other cells, making these long chains of connections in our brain. So what you're seeing is those infant neurons growing all the way up to age 2. So you notice all of the new dendrites and connectors that are thickening as those cells develop. So what you're literally seeing is a skill growing over time, just 2 short years. Can you imagine what your networks look like in your brain now? Pretty thick. Because by the time you're 25 years old, every neuron in your brain is connected to 10,000 other neurons. Now, those long networks have to fit inside of your skull. So they literally squish down and compress, which is why we get all these funky wrinkles and grooves in our brain. So you can see where the thickening, the connecting is happening, right behind the forehead, halfway up the skull. By the time we're 12, we can really see that dense connection starting and the pruning really taking place. So the more the darker the color, the less gray matter. So that's the actual cell or the cell body, but the more white matter, those are the dendrites, those connectors. So by the time we're about 12, we've got about 10 to 15% of our frontal lobe. And so I just want to share a case that I've been working on lately. I've got a 12-year-old client who has been able to hack into the internet and get all kinds of different subscriptions and memberships to different shows and like the Disney Channel. So she can watch movies, and she's got an Etsy account, and she orders products all the time. time. And she just does not understand why something is that's wrong. She doesn't even see it as stealing, even though she's figured out how to use all kinds of different credit cards and birthdays and social security numbers. She just does not get that it is wrong or bad because she is entertained. So she's got the frontal lobe of a 12-year-old, which is about 10 to 15%. And so a lot of the executive functioning skills that would really help her understand why these things are wrong and bad have just not grown or developed yet. And much to the chagrin of her parents, who are not quite sure how to handle that, part of the problem is that we have to wait for her frontal lobe to continue to grow those skills. By the time we are 16 years old, we've got about 45% of our adult skills, which is also scary because we get a license to drive with half a brain at that age. But even at age 20, we've got about 80% of our frontal lobe online. So between 20 and 25, we have a whole fifth of brain development yet to go. Now, what is critical for clinicians, parents, anyone who loves and works with a kid to understand is what the frontal lobe does for us. So our beautiful prefrontal cortex is in charge of all of our basic thinking, feeling, and doing skills. Scientists call them executive functioning. So when we think about all of those skills, it's easy to memorize them because they're really just two big lists, and you're seeing them right here. So the first list on the left, these are what scientists refer to as lower level executive functioning skills. These are the ones that come online during that first phase of development when all of our neurons are really developing. And so, if you think about these are the skills that we need to get up in the morning, get out the door, remembering our homework. One of them, task initiation, is really, you can think about that as motivation, the ability to initiate a task all on your own without being reminded or told. And so we're seeing a lot of kids today who have poor motivation for doing anything that doesn't entertain them. My client, who's going to be our case study today, she doesn't want to spend time with her mom because her mom does like really boring arts and crafts that she used to love to do when she was a kid. And she also doesn't like to do chores because those are pretty boring. And so she doesn't initiate those tasks and on her own. Now, flexible thinking allows us to move from the next feeling or idea to the next. So, our goal today is to talk about coping with anxiety and depression. And so, I really want you to take a look at these lists and think about how all of these executive functioning skills are needed when we're coping with difficult feelings like sadness or anxiety. Flexible thinking is a really important one. It allows us to let things go and move on, or literally move from one situation or task to the next. Planning and organizing and prioritizing self-care are very important. Your ability to hold lots of bits of information in your working memory are critical for learning how to cope when you're having a really difficult time. Monitoring how you're doing, being able to say, man, I think that I'm not coping with this very well. I need to ask for help is pretty critical. And paying attention to the thing that means the most. For this case, she really pays attention to novelty, new things, instead of paying attention to how she is affecting the family around her. And of course, coordinating her behavior and skills in order to manifest good coping. Now, on the right-hand side, you're going to see the skills that we need to kind of wake up in the morning, get out the door, remember our homework, and grow up and become fully self-supporting adults, right? We need all of these to scaffold to those higher level skills on the right. Now, If you think about when we're young, we're very concrete thinkers. From birth to middle school, we primarily use concrete thinking, all or nothing, black and white, my way or the highway. As we move into middle school and later high school and adulthood, we start growing the ability to think abstractly. And that means the hypotheticals, the what ifs. And so this is really important for coping with tough feelings because we need to be able to see what our lives might look like in the future and be able to understand all of the hypotheticals and take perspective so we not know why some people react to us in the way that we do. We have to be able to control our impulses in order to not isolate, instead, maybe ask for help or control, in my client's case, the impulse to do something that's going to get her in trouble on the web. Problem solving, decision making, judgment, all of those are critical for healthy self care. And then, of course, the big ones: emotion regulation, frustration tolerance. What I'm seeing more and more, especially if I've got clients who have parents who are very much addicted to their screens, is that they have a difficult time regulating. Remember, we actually have to be co-regulated by our parents before we can learn self-regulation. And if we grew up with access to a lot of screens and not a lot of face-to-face time with our parents, creating secure attachment, we're going to have difficulty learning how to self-regulate if we didn't co-regulate first. Our ability to handle frustrations and tolerance grows as we grow these skills. And then, of course, the big one, their ability to feel empathy, to understand how we show up. Now, my client has great difficulty socially. She will be very brief and short with her friends and say things like, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you want to play this?" She doesn't realize that she needs to approach it more sensitively and have empathy for how her approach might affect other people. But ironically, she wants her parents to have empathy for her when she's bored and she doesn't know how to entertain herself. So that is really the neuro whereabouts of a 12-year-old. They've only got about 10 to 15% of these skills. But as a clinician who works with kids, it is critical to remember that all of these skills grow according to the brain's rule: use it or lose it. So, yep, I'm going to go back. All of these skills only grow if we use them. So I have a lot of parents out there that I've worked with in the past who are over functioners, which means they do too much problem solving and decision making for their kids. What unfortunately that results in is kids who don't have long networks of neurons for problem solving and decision making, but they do have long networks of neurons for dependency on their parents to solve their problems and make decisions for them. Unfortunately, that creates an adult who is not an outside of the box thinker. They may not be very good at leadership or initiating things on their own. They may have to be told what to do at every step. So you can see why knowing the brain's rule is very important and memorizing the executive functioning skills. If you are a clinician, a teacher, an administrator, anybody who works with a kiddo, a nurse, a doctor, it's very important to memorize those skills and use them in your daily language. Brain-based praise, brain-based parenting, and brain-based counseling are critical to know and understand. So what I want your battle cry to be is this: dendrites, dendrites, dendrites. I want you to think about all those networks of neurons that are growing in that kiddo's brain. Now, the behavior modification program that we are putting our 12-year-old oppositional kiddo on is going to be tough for the first couple years, as her parents have trained her to pretty much get whatever she wants. So now she has long dendrites and strings of neurons for being overindulged. And that is not working very well for her socially, academically, or familially. So now we need to grow long networks of neurons for impulse control, following those rules, making better decisions, and having empathy. So we'll be working on that quite diligently. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the problem. So we know that high risk behavior is showing up earlier and earlier and earlier. When I started my career 26 years ago, my average age client was about 16 years old, and the main problem was alcohol or a substance, drug use. Today, the average age of my clients are about 12 to 13 years old, and the biggest issues that I'm seeing are anxiety, depression, poor coping skills, technology overuse, and video game addiction. And so, what's scary to me is that when I first started out, those executive functioning skills that were on the right, those higher level ones, those are the ones that I saw most of the deficits in. Today, I'm seeing more deficits in those lower level skills. And as you know, the brain's rule says we got to use those. And then we grow kind of scaffolding levels of skills. But if the beginning scaffolding levels are not being built, the next ones are not going to be either. So today, we're going to anybody has any questions? Oh, there it goes. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute and just jump in. I do not mind being interrupted. Okay, so let's talk about the two reasons why anxiety is going up. The first one is something that I have nicknamed experience deficits. Experience deficits. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid and I would say, Mom, I'm bored, she would say, go ride your bike, go outside. And I did. And so I rode miles and miles and miles around my small town in Texas, very happily. And I remember one time I got lost and I couldn't remember how I had gotten there. And so I started to panic. Although, of course, I didn't know that I was panicking. I just was really scared. And then I backtracked and I went the wrong way and then I went the right way and I got myself home. And so I learned a few big lessons from that, besides to keep track of where I was going and create a mental map in my head for those spatial items. I also learned that I could get lost, freak out, and I'd be okay. I see more and more kids who they feel anxious and then they just avoid. They don't go out and tackle that anxiety. So then they don't grow long networks of neurons for resiliency, coping skills, experience. They have experience deficits. So I've got another kiddo who's about 16 years old who's had a screen since he can remember. And when I asked him on my assessment, hey, well, how many meals do you eat every week with your parents? He said to me, what do you mean eating meals with my parents? You mean like on Christmas? So as I continued to inquire, I learned that they don't eat together, that they put their food on the island in the kitchen, and all the kids and the parents go to all their separate bedrooms and eat dinner by themselves. So he has been pretty much raised by a computer and spends most of his time in his room. And when he feels anxious about having to go to a school event, his parents get lots of phone calls that say, come pick me up. So we tried to get him on a behavior modification program, and we told the parents not to pick him up. I gave him lots of different techniques of coping that he could do, going to the bathroom, doing some deep breathing, a list of questions to ask his peers. Unfortunately, his parents kept picking him up. up. And every time that happens, he avoids the difficulty and the challenge of those social events. And then he grows long networks of neurons for avoiding, and the fear just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This is one of the reasons that we see about 50% of anxiety disorders that are diagnosed today in the United States occur before the age of 6. So that's pretty young. And the younger that kids have access to screens, the greater their anxiety, depression, and other high risk behaviors will be. Because not only are they not growing those higher level skills, they're not growing the lower level skills either. Okay, so the next reason number 2 that anxiety is going through the roof is because our screens keep our brain on and active. So scientists call this popcorn brain. So you remember that baby neuron that I showed you in those networks? Well, when they are in our brain, electricity runs down those networks through the sodium potassium pump. And so what happens is at night, when the sun's starting to set, our brain starts producing melatonin, which makes us sleepy. And those electrical impulses in our brain start slowing down. And the waves actually start to change. They get really big and puffy so that we can get very relaxed and able to sleep. But if we are looking at screens very late into the night and all day long, we get used to fast moving stimuli that keep those electrical impulses moving faster and faster and faster. So our brain is always on edge, which makes us more anxious. However, it also is creating an addiction to what we call supernormal stimuli, fast moving novel things that we see on computers and videos. Our brain really loves. We get a great dopamine hit from those. So when we get off of our screen and our addiction to supernormal stimuli starts to withdraw, that also causes anxiety. And so if you're the kind of person who's constantly looking for your phone or wanting to pick up a screen or get online, maybe you feel like you're missing something or your brain just feels bored and you want to plug in. Those are signals that you may have the beginnings or the middles or ends of a technology overuse problem. And that anxiety will keep you on edge and not in a good way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what anxiety and depression, as well as other high risk behavior, do to our frontal lobe. So it's important to remember that addiction changes the reward pathway. That reward pathway starts in our limbic system, which you can see on this picture right there in the middle of and behind the brain. But it also reaches these little dendrites and neuronal networks into our frontal lobe. So we get addicted via too much dopamine in our limbic system, but then our limbic system being intoxicated or being fearful will shut off or downregulate our frontal lobe. So let me tell you what I mean by that. This is a really great study. That is the seminal study I always used to illustrate hypofrontality. And so what we know is that when our brain is calm and on, we are not intoxicated, we are completely sober, and we're calm and we feel safe. Our brain looks like these 3 brains at the top. So we are looking in a functional MRI down into the brain. And what you're seeing is all parts of the brain are on and connected. The color shows brain activity. The darker the color, the more activity. So you can see that beautiful frontal lobe right there at the top in red. Now they took a picture of his brain 1 second apart so we can kind of see what happens over time. And it's really neat because this is what our brain should look like when we're feeling calm and active and completely sober. So we want all parts of the brain on and working together. Now, what you see at the bottom is somebody who has ingested cocaine so that we could see in the brain what's going on. Now you see that the limbic system and parts of the temporal lobe are on. It's keeping him upright and alive, but he is intoxicated. So his limbic system is flooded with dopamine. But notice what's happening in the other parts of the brain, like the frontal lobe. Downregulation means that it moves the electrical activity into the limbic system to keep you alive when you're intoxicated, but also to put you in fight or flight mode when you're scared. So, it's hard to think and solve problems when you're scared or anxious. And so that's why we do a lot of like test anxiety coping, because we need that frontal lobe to be on and thinking so that you can take that test. This is why we don't drink and drive when we're intoxicated, because the frontal lobe loses judgment at that time. Now, if you're an adult and you can do this to your brain, your prerogative. But if you are between the ages of birth and 25 and you're developing your frontal lobe, it doesn't get to develop normally if it is downregulated. And so we used to call that arrested development, but now we call it hypofrontality. And it's really caused by either too much pleasure or too much fear. Both of them have the same effect. And so I wanted to show you guys a couple examples of what that looks like. This is a pretty amazing study that was done on two high school students. One of them, if you connected all the red dots, you would see the high school student group who used technology in a very balanced way with real life experiences. They used academic, rec tech, but they had lots of free play and human interaction. That helps the brain develop all over. We're going to grow dendrites in all parts of the brain when we use all parts. But if you look at the purple lines, you will see the brain connectivity of a group of high school students who dropped out of high school and spent 12 or more hours a day at an internet cafe surfing and playing video games. Now, if you notice the bottom brain, it shows you a lot of dense connections. That's the part of the brain, obviously, that they're using a lot. Remember, dendrites, 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 those will grow in the parts of the brain that you use. So you can see that this is the part of the brain on the top that is the sensory and motor cortex. If you look up a picture of those, you will see strips of the brain going across on both sides that make up the sensory and motor cortex, which give us the ability to do hand-eye coordination. Now, look at how many networks they're growing in their frontal lobe. From the bottom, you can see it right there, and from the top, you can see that one network that's growing. These two kids, their executive, or two groups of kids, their executive functioning skills are going to peak at very different areas in their lives. Unfortunately, our tech overusers are just not going to grow them like the balanced tech users will. Okay, let me show you another one. This is a scary, scary one. And it looks at two groups of college students. One did not play any video game. The other one played a first-person shooter game. Now, notice in the baseline, you can see that beautiful frontal lobe just lit up. What they're doing is taking an empathy test. They are being asked to come up with empathic answers to different scenarios, which is a really cool way to test somebody's empathy and see in the brain where that's happening. Now, as the control group who didn't play continued to take that test 1 week and 2 weeks later, you see that the frontal lobe is still pretty active. But unfortunately for our first person shooters, their activity is really downregulated and almost non-existent in comparison. Now, when you ask these young men, they were all men in the study, okay, what do you think's going on? Like, why are you struggling to come up with empathic responses? They literally would say things like, well, I'm killing people in this game. I have to dumb down that skill. And so I just am having trouble, with it because I can't have empathy when I'm shooting people in a game. Now, I don't know if you guys are having this same reaction, but y'all, I remember when I was reading this study and I was thinking about all of our veterans that sometimes we send off to war-like situations when they're 18. And that means their frontal lobe is literally only about 60, 70% developed, right? By the age of 20, we've got 80%. So also, if you remember the brain's rule, use it or lose it. If you don't use that empathy, you may not grow it. And if our kids go off to war or combat early and they spend many tours of duty there, and then when they come back, we kind of expect them to just turn back on those skills that they have not been using for a long time. The good news is that after the age of 25, we still can grow dendrites. It just takes longer to do that because our brain plasticity and growth and flexibility has peaked at the age of 25, but we can learn those skills. Thank goodness that if you're a counselor, you know that you can still have an effect. But these researchers found that the result was so robust that they asked the kids to stop playing the game and came back in 2 weeks, reassessed them, and their frontal lobes turned back on again. So this is good news. And it's also a cautionary tale about first-person shooter games. Okay, now I wanted to show you the pictures of what it looks like when somebody has depression. Over here on the right is an adult with chronic depression. You can see his frontal lobe is really down regulated. What it should look like is this brain over on the left. Now, the thing to remember here is this is an adult, but what if it's a kid? We see more isolation and depression in kids than we ever have before, since we've been collecting data on anxiety and depression. If we don't catch it early and we don't help those kids, their frontal lobes will not develop normally. And all of those executive functioning skills will peak much lower than they should. But here's a beautiful study that validates our job as counselors and therapists and helpers. This is a study looking from the top down of an adult who went through about 6 to 8 weeks of talk therapy plus an antidepressant. You can see that beautiful frontal lobe and the whole entire brain that's lighting back up. A new way of thinking, feeling, and doing in the world. Now, if you look at a functional MRI of somebody having a panic attack, it will look like this one. You can see that the limbic system, you see those two red dots, the one on the left, that's the amygdala. That poor little limbic system is lighting up, red hot, but from the top, white hot. Now, in the back of the brain, that's our occipital lobe, the part of the brain connected to our eyes. This person is panicking and trying to find a way out of this teeny tiny little X-ray machine. And the frontal lobe is down regulating. It's moving the electrical activity into the limbic system to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So, again, if half of anxiety diagnoses are being created by the time we're 6, we really need to get busy teaching kids about anxiety. So we want to make sure that kids don't arrest. If somebody starts having anxiety early and we don't get them treatment, their frontal lobe won't look like these beautiful normal frontal lobes. They'll look much, much, much less younger or more younger. So let's move into skills. And the first skill that I love to teach adults and kids is that of emotional literacy. So please remember that the human body can experience over 100 different emotional states. What is the point of all of these emotions? Well, they're all about social interaction and living as a tribe or a community. Now, remember that even animals can experience emotions. All of these animals are experiencing what we might call depression or sadness. And don't get me started about pugs. Like they always look sad and tearful. But these animals are all experiencing fear emotion. And so you can see that looking very different depending upon the animal. And I think that is really very common in humans too. Everybody shows up differently when they're sad and depressed. Many men just stop doing things they used to enjoy. Even though they look affectively the same, they are not feeling that interior. So, what we've got to remember is that feelings are not facts. Feelings are just information. Now, I want you to think about this because if you look at a feeling wheel, remember that there are about five primary human emotions, five primaries. And then we have different tertiary, secondary emotions, but five primary human emotions. And only two of those are positive. Unless surprise is not positive to you, then it would be only excuse me, five. Did I say five positive? I meant two are positive. Two out of the five are positive. So happy or joy and surprise. All the rest of them, sad, angry, hurt, those are all not comfortable to feel, but they're not facts. So I like to teach kids emotional literacy. So my children's book series is called Know Your Neuro, Adventures of a Growing Brain. In the first book, you actually get to learn all about the accelerator and the brake and learn about neuro, your superhero. This is book 3 called Neuro Feels Feelings. All the books after that, you go on adventures with neuro to learn different skills. What we want kids to get good at is learning how to feel their feelings. And so I want you to think about this. Did you get taught this when you were a kid? I mean, I remember when, I was crying and my mom said, don't cry. That's what I learned about feelings. So here's what emotional literacy, the steps are. To be an emotionally literate adult or a kid, the first thing to do is identify the emotion that you're having. Feeling charts, feeling wheels are really great for this. When I first met my husband, he said, oh, don't worry about that. I apologize for something. He said, don't worry, you didn't hurt my feeling. And I said, wait, feeling? And he said, oh, yeah, I just have one. And so that's part of the problem too, is that we're socialized not to learn the definitions of feelings, but to repress and push those down. So the second step after you know your feeling is you just ask yourself, okay, what does this feeling mean? What does my body need and want? And then step 3, you take care of your needs and wants in a healthy way. So if I'm hungry, I need to eat. If I'm sad, I need to either talk to a friend or my husband or get a hug. Some people, nope, that's not them. They need to be quiet or they need to go run or they need to go do something else. So everybody's going to be different. So when you ask your littles or your clients, okay, what are you feeling? What does that feeling tell you that you need or you want? You're going to have lots of different answers to that. Okay. Now, our next skill, once we have emotional literacy down pat, is to harness our emotions. Because remember, feelings are not facts, they're just energy, and that energy can be seen and harnessed. So, this is a really cool study that shows the heat signature of lots of different feelings. I always think about neutral. You've got some underarm heat going on there, right? That's it. Like, you're like, man. Surprise is in your head and in your heart. Anger, you can see the wrists there, right? Woo! Depression looks really, really cold. And anxiety is right there in the middle of your chest, right? Oof, lots of gut energy there too, which is interesting because love looks very similar, but in very different ways. So this is the energy that we can see. So let's focus in just for a minute on anxiety. So anxiety is just low grade fear. That's all it is. Anxiety is not a primary human emotion. Fear is. So anxiety is just low grade fear. Anxiety means you care. It means you care about something. You don't want to fail. You don't want to lose something you have, or you're afraid of not getting something that you want. That's it. That's all. So we can frame this differently. Whenever I hear my clients say, oh my God, I have anxiety. I think about, the Inside Out movies and how frenetic anxiety energy looked in the movie. It feels pathological, but it's not. So if we can teach our clients to understand, okay, this is normal. Let's see what we can do to harness it. Then we can teach them what the relationship is between anxiety and performance. So when we are doing something, maybe we have a deadline and we got lots of stuff to get done, we're definitely not bored anymore and the pressure starts to mount. But what we know is that our best performance can come at peak pressure or peak anxiety. I love to get deadlines for my work because I'll be pretty bored and maybe just too calm and relaxed and procrastinate unless I feel a little fear of not getting something done on time. That anxiety is good. It means I care about my work and I care about meeting deadlines. So I want to make sure that I know what my zone of best performance is so that I also know when I surpass it. Because when the pressure and anxiety gets too big, which is what we see in procrastinators, they wait too long and then they start to shut down because their anxiety really gets the better of them. And it shuts off the frontal lobe instead of turning that part on. Now, what I also like to teach my clients is I want them to imagine a temperature gauge in their amygdala. The amygdala is that beautiful organelle that's kind of like a temperature gauge in our brain. It's always looking around the environment to assess stressors or threats. And when we're in the green, we're pretty calm, we're alert, but we're calm. When we get into the yellow, we're like, okay, what's going on? Something's going on. I'm not sure. There might be a threat here. High means there's a threat. And we can still perform, but usually this is when we move into the stress response or fight or flight. And especially when we're in the red, we are either fight, flight, or freeze. At that point, we lose a lot of frontal lobe options. So being able to assess this is self-monitoring, a beautiful executive functioning skill, as well as to be able to know when you need to ask for help and ask. And so teaching your clients, okay, are you in the green? Are you in the yellow? Are you in the orange? Or are you in the red? And what do you need to do for each? Now, the next coping skill would be to know your signs, and everybody has different red flags. When I'm burned out and stressed and anxious, I start thinking negative thoughts, even about my clients, and I never have that unless I'm really burned out. Sometimes my hygiene sucks. I don't wash my hair often enough. I use too much dry shampoo. Like these are my red flags, but everybody has different ones. So ask your clients, what are the signs for you when your anxiety or depression gets to the point where it's not good? So, also, we need to make sure to teach our clients the relationship between stress and cortisol. So, if you think about what happens when you're stressed, your body increases cortisol because it senses there's a stressor out there. Well, what does cortisol do? Cortisol dampens the effect of dopamine in your brain because you can't be all calm and happy anymore, right? You have to actually go out and do something good for your survival. And so it'll cut your dopamine in half, which is why we get food cravings. And so we want, sugar dense, high calorie foods when we're stressed, which are not always the best options to de-stress us. Many times those can make us more stressed. Okay, so another tool is the HALTS tour. So teaching people the acronym HALTS: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stress. Which one of these am I? And what do I need to do to take care of my needs? Because as soon as we eat, our central nervous system calms down. We take a time out and handle our anger, take a nap, connect with people, whatever we need to do really helps. Now, the next skill is to understand what your style is. So, not just your flags, but what is your style? So, if you know what you need and when you need it, you are so much more likely to actually engage in something that helps you cope. So, here are the 4 coping strategies. Centering, channeling, reflecting, and structure. So we're going to go through these. What I want you guys to do is to pick which one you are or which ones you do the most of. Ask your clients to do the same, and then you come up with a plan. So I don't know about you guys, but when somebody says just breathe, just calm down, that frankly pisses me off because that is not my core strategy. So let's figure out what yours are. If you like to center yourself, do you meditate? Do you like breathing, your deep breathing, or do you like visualization? Now, visualization helps me because it actually distracts me. But if somebody tells me to breathe without a visualization, it just irritates me. So, centering, are you the kind of person that likes to do that? And which one of these works for you? This may not be you. Getting still may not be what you like. If that's true, you might be a channeler. These are people who are like, I got to go for a run. I got to exercise, or I got to work on my art project, or I got to go throw some clay or dig in the dirt. These are ways to channel that emotional energy into something that would be positive. Now, if you have two partners that have two for different styles, being able to talk about that style and give each other room and respect is important. Okay, you might be a reflector. So for you, you might need to get that energy out of your body by talking. Counseling would be a good fit for you, or journaling. I am also not a journaler, but I love to talk until the energy is out of my body. Now, there are also people who, are reflectors that just need to go and spend time on their own. And that can be tough for people who have anxious or avoidant attachment, right? So to make sure that we know and respect somebody's style is critical. Now, the last one is structure. So I really like to center myself with visualization, talk, but I also like a good checklist. It makes me feel safe. When I'm feeling anxious and I need to know, okay, what do I need to work on? Making a checklist is a really good coping skill, but a lot of us don't think about this. I want you to think about when you go on vacation, sometimes you may have irritable bowel, diarrhea, or constipation. What's basically happening is your nervous system is sensing change. Even if it's fun change, your nervous system is sensing it. It doesn't know that that's not a threat. So it starts locking things or loosening them up. When you get off of structure or schedule, your body will react to that. So a lot of times we need to know if kids are very, very structured kids. Sometimes when people wonder if they should make a move to a different city or school, I ask them a lot of questions about whether or not a child loves or hates structure. That can really help you make a decision. So having healthy habits of eating, of drinking the right kinds of fluids, the kind of self-care you need. I need to have a massage and a facial like once every couple months or so. That feels really relaxing to me as well. Sometimes practicing is a really good way of providing structure too. Okay, so now that you get your flags, your structure, what your method is, create a little path for yourself. Okay, what kind of strategies do I like? What do I need? And creating a little a treatment plan like this is very, very helpful so that you know how to point your clients in the right direction. Now, the next skill would be making sure that you harness the power of your self-talk. So I did a study of third and fourth graders a few years back, and I asked them what their self-talk was. And here are the things that they said. Lots of negative things, and negative self-talk starts young. Really, at about first or second grade, we hear kids say things to themselves that maybe we have said out loud, their parents have said, and then get repeated as they continue to grow. Now, I want you to think when you think a thought over and over and over, it lays down dendrites, long networks of neurons in your brain for that thought, which becomes a core belief that you see the world from, just like a pair of glasses that are red or blue. When you see the world from self-talk that looks like this, you're going to struggle with feelings and negative coping mechanisms. So we need to assess our client's self-talk and then help them move into self-compassion, non-judgmentally connecting with themselves in healthy, self-soothing ways. And one way we can do that is good old cognitive therapy to understand their ants. What are your negative self-defeating thoughts? And here are the ones that I like to work with my clients. The 4 different kinds of ants. The first one would be the worry ant, who just worries, worries, worries. Anxiety like a pinball going back and forth. And there are 3 different types of that. Or you might be a critic and you're always kind of overgeneralizing or labeling or judging, or maybe feeling like a victim. And then there's our primary victim thinker who really personalizes, blames others, feel like they can never do anything right. And then, of course, our last one, our perfectionistic ant who thinks in very concrete, all or nothing ways, says a lot of shoulds, minimizes the positives, and maybe even has imposter syndrome if they're not perfect. All of these negative core beliefs can lead to lots of anxiety and depression. Okay, last but not least, our basic coping skills. One of the ones that I love for kids is to put the activity pyramid on the fridge. And when kids say, I'm bored, what do I do? You can simply say, choose one of these things on this list and we'll make sure we make it happen. Remember, we underprotect our kids online and we overprotect them in person. So we need to make room in their lives and cultivate friendship groups that kids can stay active and connected with. Now, of course, breathing is always important. And so I really love to teach people who are shallow breathers how to be thick depth breathers. And one of the ways that I like to do that is with my favorite breathing exercise called the physiological sigh. And so this is a short inhale, a long nasal inhale, and a long exhale with an audible sigh. Now, when your brain and body hear you sigh, that is a universal sign for relaxation. Either you've eaten a good meal or you've done a day's work and now you can relax. Do 2 or 3 of these when somebody's having anxiety. Allow them to understand how that physiological sigh stimulates our vagus nerve and shifts our parasympathetic nervous system into gear. Sympathetic physiological sigh. The last thing I like to do, especially with clients who show active signs of anxiety, are asking them to shut their eyes and do a grounding exercise. Most of you guys have probably heard of these already, but I like to use deep breaths for this. You take a deep breath in, put your feet flat on the floor, put your hands touching the arms of your chair, and you gently look around the room and silently name 5 things that you can see. Then you do another deep breath with a nice physiological sigh, and gently close your eyes and name 4 things you can hear. Another deep breath. Silently name 3 things you can feel. Deep breath. Name 2 things you can smell. And one more deep breath. Silently name 1 thing you can taste. Then you flutter your eyes back open again. Your central nervous system is grounded. Your frontal lobe is on. You are now your frontal lobe's superhero. All right, so if you like these coping mechanisms, if you want more information, please feel free to reach out and check out my free online prevention program called knowyourneuro.org. You can find my children's book series K through 2 or grades 3 through 5, or my parent guide or my therapy guide on Amazon. Okay, I'm seeing some items in the chat. Oh, okay. Looks like you put the
Postmaster.
links there. Does anybody have questions for me before we leave today?
I just wanted to mention that you have another presentation coming up on September 9th, in case anyone else would like to put that on their calendar.
Oh, wonderful. Does it say what this topic is? I can't remember.
It might have, but I didn't write it down, so I don't know.
Okay. Let me look really quick. So it's September 9th. Looks like we're going to be doing, yeah. Oh, let's see. I can't find it really quick. No, I don't see it. Sorry. We're going to have to figure that out at a later moment. So September 9th, I'll be making another presentation. Cannot remember about what it is, but we are definitely going to do it. So, thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate you having me. If you have any specific questions that you want to reach out and ask, please know that is my email address, Crystal at Dr. Crystal Collier, and I'd love to help if I can in any way.
I wanted to mention also, I had trouble with my computer right in the middle and I went offline and then it just came back on. So I hope that everyone else was able to stay on. I don't know.
Oh, we actually were. I checked and Megan unmuted to let me know we were still on. And so whatever you did to set us up, it stayed true. Thank you.
Okay, so I did find the title for the September 3rd is Technology and the Brain.
Oh, there it is, September 3rd. Okay, that's why. Wonderful.
Yes.
That's a really good one. All about technology and how it's affecting us in 8 different areas of our brain.
Well, thank you, Dr. Collier. Excellent presentation today. I always enjoy your presentations. So
Oh, thank
thank all
you.
of you for joining us. And if there's no more questions, or I think I think we're ready to sign off. Well,
Okay,
all right. Well, thank you.
thanks. Thanks you guys for coming. Bye.
Bye.